Shirley Adams for the Sewing Connection, Series 17, Program 9. In live seminars, I'm always asked questions concerning putting it all together. How do you decide what fabrics you can combine for a project? And what notions and embellishments will make it look complete, unique, elegant? For me, it all starts with big zipper bags, and then you collect things that look like they belong together. Simple as that. When you come across another likely candidate, just put it in the bag, and before long it becomes obvious that some things don't quite click, and so you take them out and redirect your thinking. Let me show you how this works. You can see by my groupings on the table what is the cement that holds each together: color. Starting over here, I have a lot of purples and magentas, and I just keep throwing all those little, I have projects made out of all of these. These are just the tag ends of them. And so then I just keep putting those things in the bag. For instance, I really like this chunk of pink ice, and it goes with this piece of fabric very nicely. It doesn't necessarily go with this or with some others, but it goes with this one. So I'll throw it in the bag because I don't know which things will eventually be eliminated. I like this two-piece buckle. It looks like it really goes with this suede or with any of these, and it doesn't go with some of the other things over there, but I like it with this. So it's the same color family. I'll put it together. I might tie it all together with this print, maybe use it, as the lining or in some way or other. I like some buttons over here, this one with a little jewel on it. I think it looks pretty on this amethyst suede, and these buttons look pretty on this kind of lavender. And here's one that's just sort of a purpley color, very dull, and it might go nicely with this. But they certainly don't all go together. Some have to be eliminated, and it's just a matter of deciding what combination of things you like best and then taking some of them out. I also would throw into that bag some clippings. For instance, I see a pair of shoes over there that I really like. There are a few different colors of leather, and they're pin-tucked of all things. There are pin tucks going around in those shoes. Well, why not borrow that idea from shoes and put them on a vest or a bag or some other project? Because this is what you do when you create, when you design. You borrow things that you see here and there and change them into your thing and then put them on a project. Here's another grouping, and this is all in greens and purples, olives really, and purples. And what brought this together? A couple of things. A print fabric. In this print, I have about 3 different shades of green, and they all are in here. They all would go with this in some way. I also have a little bit of purple here, and that looks very much like that plum leather that I have down here. It also kind of blends, as does this one, but they certainly don't go together, but it also blends with this kind of bronzy leather that I have up there. I might use that in some way. So while I'm debating, I just put all these together and keep working on them until something works out. A few programs ago, I had some kimono silk. This is one of these. This is taken apart from a kimono. It's one of those very narrow Japanese fabrics, but look what a marvelous color combination is. If you don't have good color sense, then a good way to start is just to take a print fabric and borrow their color combinations and find things that go with them. So I kind of like the way a lot of these things go with this print, and I'll probably use this print as the focal point of it and eliminate this one, but I don't know that yet. And as I look over a little farther, those purples kind of go with this group also. So who knows, they might be all shuffled around before they're finally put together. I also had a group of zippers that went with these colors. They're in the same colors. I have a lot of pretty embroidery threads, so if I do some embroidery on any of these, I have all sorts of threads that go along. And here's kind of a neat cord that I think came from a drapery and upholstery shop. Or here you can buy these combination cards of, maybe about 10 yards of each of these different yarns and cords. They all go beautifully with this whole grouping. So there are some possibilities. Or some ribbons here. Now, it isn't likely that you'd put these organdy ribbons with maybe this suede. You'd probably put them with something else. So one or the other, something has to give. They aren't all going to go together, but some of them might. Or here's a velvet ribbon, and this might go nicely with some of them. Or here in another little bag, I'm collecting a whole lot of things that can go one way or another with these things. It might be yarns, it might be beads, it might be buttons. I have all kinds of goodies in here, but some way or another, These things are going to combine and they're going to come out in a completed whole eventually. You see why I say that this is the biggest pleasure for me. I love to create by getting all this together, and it kind of does itself. It just eventually tells you, this is what I want to be. So you just sort of sit by and listen for it to say that to you, and eventually everything will click and become obvious that this is going to be the project. This is what makes sewing so much fun. Now, I know some of you love to buy things in kits. I don't. I like to have my own choices and pick it all out and put things together, because that's the fun part as far as I'm concerned. You might find the finishing part more fun, or you might find whatever part, but this is where it all starts. Then over here, I'll probably have a program sometime called Got the Blues, because I've got a lot of blue fabrics here, and it's all going to be based, I would guess, on this denim. I can see a big denim coat. And so if I take that denim, then what other fabrics am I going to put with it? Maybe it'll have just some piping of some other things, or maybe some strips here and there of it. Maybe I'll just have denim on the outside along with, some stitching and some beads. And here I have a whole grouping that go with the denims very nicely. Again, just a fun group in this bag. And I'll just dump these out and see what we have. All kinds of beads and buttons that I've been collecting and yarns. And I like all these things with the denim. They all go nicely here. I have a bunch more beads in another bag within a bag. But anyway, all these things you throw in together, and eventually they emerge into something that you just can't resist. So there's another idea. Now I have all these other coordinating fabrics too. Some of them would go with the blue, but all these certainly will not go together. Maybe a quilter could make sense of them and put them all together. Not me. I'm going to eliminate a bunch of these. Here I bought these at some craft show as a grouping. Now these are all pretty. All these things might be blended and quilted together. I would possibly just use some of them with that. So I may or may not use that in the grouping. Here is, I like the way this is dyed. Isn't that pretty? The way it was just sort of dyed in an interesting manner. It looks almost like a batik, the way it's dyed, like the wax was broken and some of the color was creeping in here and there under the wax. Now here are some that I would immediately eliminate, because look what this does for you. Absolutely nothing. You certainly wouldn't put any of these together. So here's a grouping that I would absolutely eliminate if I'm going to use this. They don't go together. So this becomes obvious after you start playing with them. If I use that, I also won't use this. If I use that, well, this could be used in another place maybe. So it's a possibility. Some of these things look kind of oriental, like this one looks like it is some oriental stitching. Here are some little characters in an oriental language also. That could be used together maybe because it's the same mood. Here are a couple of ikat. They probably wouldn't be put with these orientals. They'd be kept together in something else. So these I'd separate. This looks a little bit oriental with the butterflies and fans. I might even combine those in some way. This doesn't seem to go, it's too blue, doesn't go here especially. So you'd have to think about that, and maybe it just goes by the wayside and doesn't get used at all. This is a print that's kind of interesting, and it has, individually they might all go with the denim, but together, no, these two don't do anything together at all. So you start to eliminate some things, and maybe you have whatever's left over that you haven't eliminated yet. Maybe that's going to be the good solid grouping that you use as the end result. Here are a couple more down here. Again, some Japanese fabrics, cotton in this case, but it doesn't go with these other Japanese fabrics that I have. So doesn't matter where the country of origin was. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to go together. Here I've got a blue that might go together. These two look like they'll do. They might branch off and become a completely different group and not be with this one with the denim at all. So all kinds of possibilities. I sometimes play with these until my whole big sewing room floor is covered with stacks and groupings of them. And then eventually you have to decide, okay, put some of those away. I can't walk across the floor anymore. And so by the time I cover the whole table, then I end up on the floor after that. Another few things that I'm doing over here, I just have this. Now these are all from Central America, but they don't go together, so they can't be used together. They just came from the same place. These are all, if you can imagine, embroidered by hand. all of these bees. I don't know if I'd use this as a whole or if I'd cut it in a couple or 3 pieces to use it on a project, but sometime it'll pull some project together, and I will do that. Here's another one that's been all embroidered, and I don't know if that'll become part of a bag or a vest for me, or maybe my granddaughter will have that on a vest, but it's going to be some pretty project at some time, because any of these special things that somebody, the person who did this, I don't know, I bought this little piece, but all this has to be used in some very special way and not let it go to waste. Here's something else that came from the same area, but it doesn't go with this really. Well, maybe so. Maybe if I would put this on the side of a bag, maybe this could be the shoulder strap. The colors are kind of similar. So you think about those things a while and see what emerges after you have given it a lot of thought. Going back to this little thing, one clipping that I had here somewhere, it got lost in the under some pieces. Here's a clipping of a bag that I thought was real pretty, and figure out how they do things. As you see things done commercially, I decided this is how. I would take a piece of this suede and cut it like this, not all the way to the end, just in the midsection. And then a second piece of suede I would cut through all the way, except leave this end intact. And then I would just do some weaving so that this would go under and over, and the next one would go the opposite way, over and under and so on. And so this is how you have to figure these things out, and anything I'm trying to figure out how someone else has done it, or how things are happening in my mind, I usually do them in scraps of paper like this. I'm not going to cut into the good fabric until I'm sure that I know what I'm doing. But that's kind of a neat technique, and that might make a nice bag sometime, just using wide strips like this. If I would do this, I wouldn't sew any of them down. I would just fuse them all to a piece of fusible interfacing on the back side, and it would hold them in place. It would be loose in that I could still put my finger under this, but the back sides of these would be fused down, and so they wouldn't move at all. Here's another group that I have going, and this becomes very obvious when you look at these that, nah, it really can't all go together. Some of those things have to get out of there. And this is when you start changing the mix. For instance, I have some of this pewter suede. I have a raincoat out of this that you saw several series ago. Or not suede, leather. Really, even though the colors kind of are nice, you really wouldn't put lace on leather. So that incongruity would eliminate the lace probably and not put it together with that. I might also like this ribbon with it. Well, we'll see. These metallic cords, they may or may not go with it. Or here I have a suede. The colors are kind of pretty. Here's another suede. And if I would use these suedes and leathers together, then I don't suppose that I would use these metallics, so that would eliminate them. I don't suppose by the time I'd combine these three, I'd put this ribbon on. Well, I don't know, I kind of like that. We'll see. Some zippers that would go in there if I do them in a bag, or zip a vest maybe. And down here I have a real treasure. Besides this suede, that is another possibility. But what I have down here is something that really interested me. This is a barramundi skin. You see barramundi on the menu in every restaurant in Australia. And when I saw this, after I had seen that in many, many restaurants, when I saw this, I asked what in the world it was from the woman who was selling it. She told me, I thought, this big piece of leather is that fish skin? It's amazing, and you can see where the scales were actually pushed out and how the skin, you know, closes over. It's wonderful, and it has been tanned. It smells like leather. It doesn't smell like fish, and it has also been given this kind of gray-green color. Well, I like the way this blends with some of these suedes and leathers, and if I'd use the barramundi with them, then I certainly wouldn't use any of these things. They absolutely don't belong. But you can see how these things all come to be. You think you could do some of this creating. Once you just let yourself go, free yourself up to do this, there is simply no stopping you. What I might do if I would use this barramundi, for instance, is perhaps I would make a bag out of this. And I wouldn't want to cut him up. Well, maybe I would. But then again, maybe I would make a big bucket bag out of this and just put him in between two other colors. And then the bag would fold around, and this would be the side of the bag. And maybe there'd be a zipper across the top and a shoulder strap out of one of the other suedes. So things start forming together when you put these things all together. I also have a group of buttons. And what the common denominator is here is those buttons came from the sea, the same as that barramundi came from the sea, and yet I don't think I'd use the buttons with the fish. So kind of fun to do that, don't you think? Let's go over to the table here and see some other things that are in progress. Now these things I already have partly sewn. I don't just have the raw materials, I have them actually starting in something. You saw this last series actually. Somebody's vest that I borrowed was just beautiful, and it was this type of Seminole piecing, so I was demonstrating how to do that. Well, by the time I put this together, I started out by just having this striped fabric, putting all the stripes together, and then cutting it up and doing the Seminole piecing. And then I had a lot more of those stripes, so I cut them in other little bars. I'm not going to waste any of these things that I've already done some work on. I am definitely going to make something out of it. So I just started making this big line of them, putting them all together. Now, after you have a whole line of those, you better at some point, and here I have the original that I'm still cutting off, at some point you have to decide, what in the world am I doing with this? Well, I think probably what I'm doing with this is just combining it with the rest of this silk shantung here, and maybe I'm making a jacket, something like this. Those stripes that are down there, those strips of fabric that are all pieced, I might do that with it. And just have a strip like that going down each side, and then have the rest of it the solid purple. I don't know yet. It hasn't completely told me what it wants to do, but it will before long, I'm sure. So this is just what really delights me. This is part of the fun of sewing, and this is the greatest recreation, I think, just letting these things happen. Another one, Ann Wall, is a person who makes patterns and who does a lot of this cut work on suedes. Well, she gave me this little scrap, this little piece here. I'm not going to let that go to waste because she spent some time working on that. And so what I have done here is just stitch it onto a piece of suede that has already been fused to a piece of fleece. Now this is the fusible fleece. This is what I always use in craft projects like bags or belts. And what I'm making here is a bag. The original pattern, the original bag looked like this. It's from a clutch bag pattern. The clutch bag just looks like this. And what has happened then is the bottom third folds up, the top third folds down, and here's the bag. This is what it looks like. Well, because hers wasn't rounded like this one is, like this pattern is, because hers comes to a point down there, instead of rounding it, I made this also to a point. Now that's easy enough. You simply take that same pattern and make a point there instead of a curve at the bottom. Everybody can do that. That's not a problem at all. So just do a little changing. Think what you can do along those lines. That also, by the way, is a clutch bag pattern, and there are a whole lot of other suggestions that come with that. And I showed a lot more of these clutch bags then in series 14 is where these were. There were a lot of clutch bags there because that's just a great way to use up a lot of little bits of this and that, little things that you want to keep, you want to use them in some interesting way, but they're too little to be a garment or something in themselves. They have to combine with other things to be made. Here's another one that I have, and this combination over here is again going to be a bag. But this one is going to be a bag like this, a double clutch. It opens in two places. So this flap opens and I have this part of the bag, and the other flap opens and I have a second compartment in this bag. So it's a double clutch. What I've done, I have this, and this is also hand embroidered. Every stitch here is all hand embroidered, which seems like an impossibility to me, but somebody has done that. And so that little scrap of fabric I have, it came from somewhere in India, I believe. What I also have is these little baubles that came from India, and they can be attached to a chain and used as a pendant, as a necklace, but I'm going to attach them instead to this bag. What I have done to it is, again, fuse it to some of that fusible fleece. And then after I fused that part, then I just had scraps left over of these other suedes that were the same colors. And so to get them together, I decided, or I found in my stash, if you wonder, do I have a warehouse? What do I have for a stash? No, it's just my sewing room, but it's just all neatly organized and put away in drawers and big closet shelves, floor-to-ceiling shelves, so I have plenty of room for all this. But I thought, well, there's that green. I wouldn't have thought of putting this here, but it told me, go ahead and use that green in here. So that's where I've put the rickrack, so that it would join the two pieces and make them look finished on the edges. And then for the second layer, the double flap, the double clutch, this is what's going to show, just this part down here, but I didn't have a big enough piece of that left, and so I have a couple of other pieces of suede there that I needed to combine with it in order to make it big enough to do the job. And because the colors are all here, I'm using this that's left over from a pant outfit I have, top and pants. I'm using that for the lining because they all blend so beautifully together. Just look what small pieces of everything have gone into here, and you make a coordinated whole that way. Well, if I'm going to make a bag, what I'm going to do is have the one layer all fused to that fusible fleece. That's the fashion fabric layer. It's going to be fused to that. The lining is all going to be fused to some interfacing, and really, this is Armaweft. It's kind of heavy interfacing. You wouldn't ordinarily fuse that to lining fabric, but it's appropriate because you want to stiffen it. You want to make it heavy, so it's appropriate for these bags to do that. And this one's all ready to go together, so I might as well do a little sewing on it and get a little bit more ahead of the game. Eventually I get all these projects done by doing a little bit here and there. These are fun projects to work on when you maybe just have a few minutes in your sewing room. Maybe you just have a half hour, so what are you going to do with that half hour? Well, let's make it something profitable. And in that half hour that I have, I could do a couple of things. For instance, on this bag, I'm going to sew my label on the lining. And you need to figure out, okay, exactly where is that label going to come out. So right here is where I'm going to sew it. Not at the flap end down here. I'm going to sew it right here because it's hard to gauge where on the rest of it it would come out. So I would just sew it down right here by turning under the raw edges, putting it under the presser foot, and just sewing it right here. So if you have labels, by all means, put them in everything. And if you don't have labels, these are made commercially, you certainly have some capability of doing a label of your own, maybe on a ribbon or on a piece of fabric, but put labels and things. They're pretty. They're kind of nice to make it personal. You can see that on this I already have the interfacing fused to the back side. And ordinarily when I do this, I have my lining larger than the fashion fabric side, and this one has all been fused to the fleece. I usually have this larger because rather than trying to make those edges just mesh, it's so much easier if you have this one cut to the exact size and have the lining one bigger, have it underneath as you do your sewing, and then just sew around the very edge of this and then trim away what you don't want of the lining. It just makes a quicker job when you do that instead of having to do the whole thing. Now as I do this sewing, I'm just going to start at any point and go ahead and pin the two layers together because I'm not just going to start sewing. Things would shift a little bit. I want to instead make sure that they are all completely together and all firm by getting pins in. And I'm going to make these small seam allowances really smaller than what my pins are. I'll probably stitch it a scant 1/4 inch from the edge because there's no reason to have a larger seam. You would just have to trim it off after you're finished. So I might as well just make them small. So I'm just going to pin some of this, and I usually pin like this so it's parallel to the stitching line that I'm going to do because this makes it easy then to just get everything together and take it out as I get to it. And what I'm going to pin is all around 3 sides, and I'm going to leave this side here open because this is where you need to turn it somewhere. So I'll leave that side open for turning. And you need no special needle for this, by the way, when you do this combination of fabrics. I'm just going to use an ordinary sewing needle. It's going to be about a number 80 because anything bigger than that, if you have to do any ripping out, it might leave holes. So that'll be fine for the job. And What I will do after I get this all stitched together and I turn it right side out, I will put something there for the finishing touch. And I'm afraid I have already gone past the point where I needed to. I'm going to take this apart and redo it because I forgot I had this braid. I'll show you what that braid is just by taking out a few pins here. What's nice about that braid, it is a commercial braid. And what I thought was fascinating about it is the fact that you can use it to stitch flat. That's what I used to cover up the raw edges here that I stitched right over the edge of Anne's pretty little piece of suede. And I stitched around, going around all these sides. And when I got to here, I thought, what am I going to do with it? Because it can't easily be turned under. So I just went around this circle so I could push it under without having to fold it back so that it worked out well. But that's a flat braid. What I'm going to use then all around the edge is I'm going to put this on first before I put it on the lining because that flat braid can just fold in half. These can be the raw edges here that you use for piping. They can come out here, and the cord itself is in there. Then after it's all stitched around and turned, that cording will be there and just finish it up nicely. Well, some of these colors that I used were soft, maybe even somber, but variety is good. Next time, let's consider what to do with the wild ones. Come join me then.